In September of 1900, the journalist and anti-lynching crusader Ida B. Wells-Barnett published a slim, unflinching pamphlet titled Mob Rule in New Orleans. Its full title promised the story of Robert Charles and his fight to death, an account of burning human beings alive, and a table of lynching statistics. Wells set out to do what no Southern newspaper would do honestly, to lay the facts of a single terrible week before the conscience of the nation. Drawing freely from the reports of the very papers that had condemned her people, she reconstructed how, in July of 1900, the city of New Orleans fell into the hands of a mob. This deck walks through that account, page by page, in her own measured, devastating voice.
Wells did not write to inflame, but to document. She did not attempt to moralize over the deplorable condition of affairs, she explained, but simply to present the facts in a plain, unvarnished, connected way, so that he who runs may read. She did not believe that the American people, who had encouraged such scenes by their indifference, would read unmoved these accounts of brutality, injustice, and oppression. The moral conscience of the nation, she insisted, could not always remain silent in the face of such outrages, for God is not dead, and his spirit is not entirely driven from men's hearts. When that conscience woke and spoke out in thunder tones, it would need facts to use as a weapon against injustice. It was for this reason that she carefully compiled, printed, and sent forth these facts.
Before the story of New Orleans, it is worth knowing the woman who told it and the long campaign of investigation that brought her to this work.
Ida B. Wells was born enslaved in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862, the daughter of parents who died of yellow fever when she was 16. She kept her younger siblings together, taught school, and moved to Memphis, where she became a teacher, then an editor and part owner of the newspaper Free Speech. She was a small woman with an unshakable will, who had once sued a railroad for throwing her from a first-class car and won before the verdict was overturned. By 1900, she had married the Chicago lawyer Ferdinand Barnett and taken the name Wells-Barnett. But she had already become something rarer and more dangerous to the men she exposed. The nation's foremost investigator of lynching, a reporter who answered terror not with silence, but with evidence.
Her crusade began in blood in March of 1892, when 3 of her friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, were dragged from a Memphis jail and lynched. Their only crime had been to open a grocery, the People's Grocery, that competed successfully with a white-owned store. Their deaths taught Wells a truth that overturned the excuses of the age, that lynching was not the punishment of criminals, but a weapon to keep Black people poor, frightened, and in their place. She investigated case after case and proved that the charge of assault on white women, the cry used to justify the mob, was most often a fiction. For printing this, a white mob destroyed her newspaper office and threatened her life. She continued the work from the North and never lived in the South again.
Wells opens the pamphlet by explaining why she set aside her other work to write it. The year before, she reminds the reader, an awful barbarism had disgraced the state of Georgia when more than a dozen colored people were put to death with unspeakable cruelty. She had published a full report showing that Sam Hose, who was burned to death during that time, had never committed a criminal assault and had killed his employer in self-defense. Since then, she had been engaged on a work not yet finished, which she now interrupted to tell the story of the mob in New Orleans, which, despising all law, roamed the streets day and night, searching for colored men and women whom they beat, shot, and killed at will. The pattern, she knew, was national, and it was repeating itself again.
Wells's method was as careful as a prosecutor's. Rather than rely on her own testimony, which white readers would dismiss, she built her account from the columns of the New Orleans Times-Democrat and the Picayune, the two great white dailies that had reported the week in minute detail. Both papers were hostile to her cause, both strained to justify the police and to brand Robert Charles a desperado. Yet in their own breathless reporting, they recorded the facts that damned them: the unprovoked arrest, the cowardice of officers, the torture of helpless prisoners. By quoting them at length, Wells let the mob's defenders convict the mob. She thanked the papers for their detail, even as she turned their words into an indictment, reading their accounts against the grain to recover the truth they had tried to bury.
The bloodiest week New Orleans had known in a generation began, Wells writes, with a single act of lawless authority. 3 policemen who decided to arrest 2 men who had done nothing at all.
The bloodiest week which New Orleans had known since the massacre of the Italians in 1892, Wells writes, was ushered in by the inexcusable and unprovoked assault upon 2 colored men by police officers. On a warm Monday night, 2 men sat talking on a doorstep on Dryades Street. They had left their homes a short while before and had broken the peace in no way whatever. No warrant lay in any officer's hand justifying an arrest, and no crime had been committed of which they were suspected. Yet 3 policemen, Sergeant Aquan and officers Mora and Cantrell, fortified by long experience in the New Orleans service and secure in the belief that they could do anything they wished to a Negro, crossed the street and determined, without a shadow of authority, to take the 2 men into custody.
One of the 2 men was named Robert Charles. The other was a lad of 19 named Leonard Pierce. In less than 3 minutes from the time the officers accosted them, they attempted to put both men under arrest. The younger man, Pierce, submitted, for the officer who confronted him put a gun in his face, ready to blow his brains out if he moved. The other man, Charles, was made the victim of a savage attack by Officer Mora, who struck him with a billet and then drew his gun and tried to kill him. Charles drew his own gun nearly as quickly, and a duel began in the street, in which both men were shot. The officer got the worst of it and fell helpless to the sidewalk. Charles, wounded in the leg, made his escape into the darkness, and a manhunt was at once set in motion.
Behind the newspaper word desperado stood a thoughtful, sober man. Robert Charles had been born in Mississippi around 1865, the child of formerly enslaved parents, and had come to New Orleans as a laborer. He neither drank nor caroused. He had grown deeply troubled by the violence of the age and had become an agent for a movement urging Black Americans to emigrate to Liberia, distributing its newspaper and dreaming of a place where his people might live free of the mob and the lynching tree. In his rented room, investigators later found not the lair of a criminal, but evidence of a self-educated man, his emigration pamphlets, and his careful belongings. He was, by the account of those who knew him, quiet and law-abiding, until the night 3 officers decided that a Black man sitting on a step was theirs to beat.
In any law-abiding community, Wells argues, Charles would have been justified in giving himself up at once and asking for a trial by a jury of his peers. He had the clear right to resist an unwarranted arrest and to defend his life, even to the point of taking one in that defense. But Charles knew that his arrest in New Orleans, even for defending his life, meant nothing short of a long term in the penitentiary, and still more probably death by lynching at the hands of a cowardly mob. It is now, as it was in the days of slavery, Wells writes, an unpardonable sin for a Negro to resist a white man, no matter how unjust the attack. Knowing that to be captured meant to be killed, Charles very bravely resolved to protect his life as long as he had breath in his body, and to sell that life as dearly as he could.
Without a single line of evidence, Wells notes, the New Orleans papers at once declared both men desperados and burglars who had begun the assault. The order soon went out to shoot Charles on sight, given before anyone had even been killed. the only proof of his desperate character being that he had refused to be beaten over the head for sitting on a step. Because Mora was white and Charles was black, Charles was instantly made an outlaw. The mayor of New Orleans gave the mob legal sanction, publicly proclaiming a reward of $250, not for the arrest of Charles, but for his body, dead or alive. The advertisement named him the Negro Murderer and authorized any man of the mob to hunt him down like a dog, on sight, before any court had heard a word.
Hunted to his door in the dark hours of Tuesday morning, the wounded Charles made the first of the stands that would astonish even the men trying to kill him.
The manhunt ran Charles down before dawn, locating him at his home on 4th Street. Near 2 in the morning, a large detail of police surrounded the block with the intent to kill him on sight, Captain John Day at their head. Charles, wounded, was inside, prepared, as the results showed, to die in his own home. Captain Day started for his room. As soon as Charles saw him, there was a flash, a report, and Day fell dead in his tracks. In another instant, Charles stood in the doorway, and seeing patrolman Peter Lamb, he fired again, and Lamb too fell dead. The other officers, seeing their comrades drop, fled into an adjoining house and blew out their lights, hiding in the dark until daybreak. One of them, Wells records, ran 7 blocks before he stopped, later claiming he had been hunting for a patrol box.
Wells lingers with cold irony on the contrast between the men's courage and Charles's. Sergeant Aucoin, who had been so brave a few hours before when he supposed the 2 men on the doorstep were unarmed, now knew that Charles had a gun and the nerve to use it, and so he hid himself in a dark room for 2 hours while Charles deliberately walked out of his house and into the street. At daybreak, the officers felt safe to renew the attack and broke into his room, only to find what they probably already knew: he was gone. He had escaped by crawling through a hole in the ceiling into a little attic, then out a window and over a fence. A wounded man, alone, had killed 2 armed captains of police and slipped through a cordon of officers who had surrounded his home. As the hunt widened, the white papers reached for ever more lurid language, styling Charles a fiend, a monster, the most formidable creature ever loosed upon the community. The Times-Democrat marveled at the extraordinary marksmanship of the Negro desperado, whose aim was deadly and whose coolness must have been phenomenal, noting that the 2 shots that killed Day and Lamb had struck them in the head amid darkness and sudden fury. Wells reproduces this language deliberately, for it reveals the strange contradiction at the heart of the coverage. The same press that called Charles a coward and a brute could not help but record his discipline, his courage, and his deadly skill. The man they needed the public to despise was, in their own telling, extraordinary, and they could not hide it. Unable to reach Charles, the mob turned its fury on any black person it could find, and for 3 days, New Orleans belonged not to the law, but to the rope and the gun.
By Wednesday, Wells writes, New Orleans was in the hands of a mob. Unable to vent its vengeance upon Charles, the crowd turned upon other colored men and even women who happened into its path. The reign of absolute lawlessness began about 8 o'clock, when a crowd of some 700 gathered near the Lee statue. A lean, unshaven man in poor clothing leaped onto a box and announced himself the mayor of Kenner. He had come, he shouted, to teach the blacks a lesson. He had killed a Negro before and was willing to kill again. The only way to put them in their place, he cried, was to go out and lynch a few as an object lesson, to string them up. He promised to lead if the crowd would follow, and called them on to the parish prison to lynch young Leonard Pierce. The mob bore down on the parish prison like an avalanche, but the jailer turned them away. You cannot have Pierce, and you cannot get in. Balked, the crowd broke into fragments, each looking for a Negro to kill, and turned to the streetcars. "We will get a nigger," they boasted, and when a car came along, they pulled down its trolley, threw it into darkness, and ordered all white passengers out. Time and again through that night and the next, Wells records, the mob halted cars, searched them, and dragged out black riders to be shot, beaten, and stamped in the street. One man was chased into the glare of an arc lamp, brought down by a volley, beaten as he lay, half drowned in a gutter, and finished with a pistol pressed against his body, his only offense that he was a colored man riding home.
The mob spared neither age nor sex. Baptiste Philo, a Negro of 75 who worked about the French market, was met on his way to work and shot in the abdomen, a wound the hospital pronounced fatal. Worst of all was the attack on Rousseau Street, where, shortly after midnight, a mob fired volley after volley through the doors and windows of a small cottage where the Mabry family lay sleeping. Hannah Mabry, an elderly woman, was shot through the lung as she slept beside her husband of decades. It was, Wells notes, miraculous that the old man did not share her fate. The mob melted into the dark before police arrived, and the neighbors gave no help, some even jeering at the men who tried to capture the attackers. These were not criminals being punished. They were the old and the sleeping, killed in their beds for the color of their skin.
Wells reserves some of her sharpest irony for the moment the violence finally stopped. The killing of a few Negroes more or less, she observes, did not cut much figure in Louisiana, and the butchery of black men and women in the streets and in their homes had not roused the best element of the city to act. But when the reign of mob law began to depress the stock market and the state's bonds dropped 1.5 points on the New York Exchange, then the strong arm of the good white people suddenly asserted itself. The better element stirred at last, Wells writes, not to punish the brutality against the Negroes, nor to bring the murderers to justice, but to save the city's credit. With its financial standing at stake, New Orleans found 1,000 willing men to restore the order it had not lifted a finger to keep, while only black lives were being lost. On Friday came the final act of the drama, when Robert Charles, run to ground at last, faced an entire city in arms and chose to die fighting.
Friday witnessed the final act of the bloody drama begun by the 3 officers on Dryades Street. Betrayed into the hands of the police, Charles had taken refuge in a small house on Saratoga Street. On a private tip, Sergeant Gabriel Porteous and 3 others went to search it. Porteous left 2 men outside and went with Corporal Lally to the rear, questioning the tenants about Robert Charles. They denied all knowledge, though the hunted man lay concealed only a dozen feet away, crouched with his Winchester in the dark end of a closet. As Porteous stepped toward a water bucket, a shot rang out, and the sergeant fell dead. Lally was shot down directly after. Then Charles dashed out the back door and up into the 2nd story of the house, kicked breaches in the partition so he could move from side to side, and like a trapped beast prepared to make his last stand. What followed, Wells writes, was a fusillade that sounded like a battle. A crowd that would swell to some 20,000 poured in from every direction, and rifles and pistols sent a hail of bullets against the blind front of the old house. Men climbed to adjacent roofs and sheds to find a firing line. Through it all, Charles retained a diabolical coolness, keeping out of sight, then thrusting his rifle through a shattered pane to fire with incredible rapidity before leaping back to safety. His replies came from all 4 windows in turn, showing he watched every direction at once, and his marksmanship never failed him. Single-handed and alone, against an armed multitude, he killed and wounded man after man, among them Andrew Van Curen and the former officer Frank Evans.
each crack of his rifle adding another name to the price he had set upon his own life.
For nearly 2 hours, the wounded man held his besiegers at bay, and as darkness threatened, the crowd resolved on a desperate expedient: to burn him out. Men rushed into the lower room and set fire to an old mattress, and dense smoke soon filled the ramshackle structure. When the smoke became too much for flesh and blood to stand, Charles descended the stairs and, with head lowered and rifle raised, flung open a door and dashed out to charge the countless guns drawn upon him. A young medical student, Dr. Narrated, fired, and Charles reeled and fell on his back. The doctor sent another ball into him as he struck the floor, and half a dozen men swarming in riddled his body with bullets. He fell dead, Wells writes, face fronting to the mob, a courage she calls indescribable, having raised his failing gun to fire one last time.
Death did not satisfy the mob. The bleeding body was dragged to the pavement and made the target of a score of pistols, then hauled into the muddy road and shot, kicked, and beaten almost out of the semblance of humanity. Corporal Trenchard, a brother-in-law of the slain Porteous, led the firing into the inanimate clay, and with each shot the crowd cheered. Cries of "burn him" rose from street to street, and only with difficulty were men restrained from setting the corpse alight with kerosene already brought to the scene. When at last the body was thrown into a patrol wagon, the crushed head hung over the end, and as the wagon jolted through the streets, the followers struck it with sticks, beating it until it was impossible to tell what the man had ever looked like. This, Wells shows without comment, was the conduct of the side that called itself civilization.
When the smoke cleared, Wells turns to the courts and finds in their ledgers the plainest proof of all, a justice that jailed the victims and let the killers walk.
The clearest measure of the week's justice, Wells argues, lay in who was brought before the courts. While the town was in the hands of the mob, the colored men who had been beaten by police and dragged to the station were quickly hauled before Recorder Hughes and fined or jailed on a policeman's word. She reprints the docket. Lee Jackson, $25 or 30 days, for saying more policemen ought to be killed. Matilda Gamble, $25 or 30 days, for saying it was a pity more were not shot. Edward McCarthy, a white man newly arrived from New York, fined the same for telling black men they were as good as any white man. Men were jailed for failing to move on, for impertinence, for words spoken in grief and anger, while a city's worth of murderers faced no charge at all. On the other side of the ledger stood impunity. In no case reported through the daily papers, Wells points out, does there appear the arrest, trial, and conviction of a single member of the mob for any of the brutalities of that terrible week. The ringleaders were at no time disguised. Men were chased, beaten, and killed by white brutes who boasted of their crimes, and those murderers still walked the streets of New Orleans, well known and absolutely exempt from prosecution. Even now that law and order was supposed to have resumed control, she writes, these men, well known, were not, nor ever would be, called to account. The contrast is her whole argument in miniature. The machinery of the law fell with full weight upon the victims and never once touched the killers. When the week was done, the dead and wounded lay on both sides of the color line, though justice would acknowledge only one. Robert Charles, before he fell, had killed 7 men, including 4 police officers, and wounded many more, an almost unheard of resistance by a single besieged man. On the other side were the colored dead and injured, whose numbers were never fully counted. The streetcar victims, old Baptiste Philo, Hannah Mabry shot in her bed, Louis Taylor cut down at the market, and the many unnamed men beaten in gutters and left for dead. Wells understood that the official record would remember only the slain officers and brand Charles a murderer,
while the black victims of the mob would be reduced to a vague figure or forgotten entirely. Part of her purpose in writing was simply to refuse that forgetting and to set their deaths upon the page. New Orleans was 1 week in one city. Wells widens her lens to the whole nation, appending a history of burnings and a table of lynchings to show that this was no aberration, but a system.
To the New Orleans story, Wells appended a section whose title alone was an indictment: Burning Human Beings Alive. Lynching in America, she had long documented, was not always a hanging in the dark. With growing frequency, it had become a public spectacle of fire, in which men, and sometimes women, were tortured, mutilated, and burned before crowds that numbered in the thousands, including women and children who came as if to a holiday. She set down case after case, the burning of Sam Hose in Georgia among them, in plain factual detail, with names, dates, and places. Her purpose was never sensation. It was to force a comfortable public to look directly at what was being done in its name, and to strip away the polite distance that let the rest of the nation pretend these were isolated frontier excesses rather than a settled and tolerated practice.
Wells closed the pamphlet with a table of lynchings reaching back roughly 18 years, a running tally drawn largely from the records of white newspapers themselves. The numbers were staggering. Well over 1,000 people, the great majority of them black, killed by mobs without trial in less than 2 decades. By compiling these figures year by year, she turned scattered horrors into a visible pattern that could not be explained away as the act of a few bad men in a few bad places. This was Wells's signal contribution to the fight. She treated lynching as a subject for evidence and statistics, not rumor and excuse. Long before such methods were common, she was assembling data, cross-checking sources, and letting the sheer accumulated weight of verified numbers make an argument that no single anecdote ever could.
At the heart of Wells's life work lay the demolition of a single lie, the claim that lynching was a rough but necessary punishment for black men who assaulted white women. By patiently examining the cases, she had shown that in the great majority, the charge was never even made, that men were lynched for debt, for insolence, for competing in business, for testifying, for nothing at all. The Robert Charles affair fit the pattern exactly. No woman was involved. The spark was simply an unlawful arrest and a black man's refusal to be beaten. The cry of protecting white womanhood, she argued, was a mask laid over the real purpose, which was to keep an entire people terrorized and subordinate. To name that purpose plainly, in print, with the receipts attached, was perhaps the most dangerous thing a black woman could do in 1900, and she did it again and again. Wells ends not with a plea for pity, but with a call to action grounded in evidence. When the moral conscience of the nation at last woke and spoke out, she had written, it would need facts to use as a weapon against injustice, barbarism, and wrong. It was for this reason that she compiled and sent forth these facts. If the reader could do no more, she urged, he could pass the pamphlet on to another, or order copies for distribution, for her bureau had no funds and depended entirely on the gifts of friends. Behind the modest request lay a radical conviction that an informed public could be moved to demand law where the law had failed, and that the careful, stubborn gathering of truth was itself a form of resistance. She asked Americans not to feel merely, but to know, and then to act upon the knowing. In the white press, Robert Charles died a fiend. In the memory of Black New Orleans, he became something else entirely. To a people forbidden to defend themselves, his stand was a quiet, dangerous legend, remembered in song and whispered story long after the papers had moved on. The man who, hunted and alone, had refused to be killed like a dog. Wells did not present him as a saint or a savior. She presented him as a human being driven to an impossible choice by a society that offered a black man no lawful protection at all. And she let the facts make him neither monster nor martyr, but a man. By placing his name beside those of the murdered innocents, she insisted that all of them, the resistor and the victims alike, were people whose lives and deaths the nation was obliged to reckon with honestly.
Mob rule in New Orleans endures because of how it was made. Ida B. Wells-Barnett took the tools of the investigative reporter, sources, quotation, statistics, cross-examination, and turned them upon a crime the whole society preferred not to see. She built her case from hostile witnesses, refused to let either the resistor or the victims be erased, and insisted that terror be met with documentation rather than silence. Her work helped lay the foundations of the modern anti-lynching movement and of organizations, the NAACP among them, that would carry the fight for decades. More than a century later, her pamphlet remains a model of moral clarity joined to factual rigor, a reminder that bearing accurate witness to injustice is itself an act of courage, and that the careful keeping of the record can outlast the mob.
Ida B. Wells-Barnett went on writing, organizing, and agitating for nearly 40 more years, founding clubs and committees, marching for the vote, and helping to build the institutions of a movement she would not live to see triumph. In her own day, she was often dismissed, threatened, and pushed to the margins, even by allies who found her uncompromising. History has reversed that verdict. The data she gathered, the cases she verified, and the lie she demolished are now part of the settled record of American history. And in 2020, her pioneering reporting was honored with a special Pulitzer Prize citation. Mob Rule in New Orleans stands among the works that earned that recognition. A small pamphlet written quickly under the pressure of fresh horror that did the enduring work of telling the truth plainly and refusing to let it be forgotten.
We have followed Ida B. Wells-Barnett through one terrible week in New Orleans, from the unprovoked arrest on Dryades Street, through the killing of the officers and the days when the city belonged to the mob, to Robert Charles's last stand against 20,000, and the courts that jailed the victims while the killers walked free. We have seen how she widened that single story into a record of burnings and a table of statistics, and how she answered terror not with vengeance, but with evidence. She asked a comfortable nation not merely to feel, but to know, and then to act. If this account moved you, share it, subscribe, and like, so that these voices and these names reach the light. Until next time, keep studying the record she left and honoring the truth she refused to let die.